Welcome to SECNAP's Breakfast of Compliance Champ Series. We've created a series of videos covering hot topics surrounding data compliance, including PCI, GDPR, SOC, and overall cybersecurity. This video, presented by Mark Akins, Senior Managing Partner at First Secure, will be discussing how to prepare for PCI compliance. Mark is a United States Air Force veteran and has over 24 years of operational experience managing organizations, people, and computer systems in diverse environments. He holds several industry certifications, including PCI QSA, CISSP, CISA, CTT, and MCSE. His technical specializations fall within the area of IT security architecture, compliance, and the auditing of secure access to network systems. His professional memberships include ISSA, ISACA, and ISC Squared. Let's listen in on Mark's presentation.
I recently moved to Jacksonville, Florida, but First Secure IT is actually based in South Florida. We have an office in Mexico City, Sao Paulo, Spain, and we just opened an office in Sydney. I've been doing QSA audits since 2010, and I've literally done hundreds of them. And I think one of the things that sets First Secure IT apart is that we have a pretty unique methodology for helping our customers become compliant. A lot of QSA companies, the larger ones specifically, will have you sign a 3-year contract, and they'll say, "Okay, let me know when you're ready, and we'll come in and we'll audit you." And that's not the way we do business. We do a lot of hand-holding, a lot of educational transfer on the processes. So today, it's methodology for compliance, PCI and 321. We're going to do a little bit of education transfer to you. We're going to talk about initially, we're going to talk about merchant levels, because there's different ways you can assess your PCI compliance. You can fill out a questionnaire, self-assessment, or you can have an auditor come on site. What's the difference? What are the requirements? And then we're going to talk specifically about our methodology for becoming compliant, for getting an organization PCI compliant. We're going to talk about scoping, gap analysis, and remediation, and then we'll go to the questions. So the compliance roadmap is determined based on your merchant level. Now, PCI has different certification processes for a merchant, somebody who processes, transmits, or stores credit card data for their customers. And there's also a different certification process for a service provider. So how many MSPs do we have in the room today? So if you're an MSP, if you resell security services, intrusion detection prevention, firewall services, multi-factor authentication services, and you sell that to a customer who needs to be PCI compliant, it's incumbent upon that customer to ask you all, "Hey, are you PCI compliant?" Right? So you would be considered a service provider. A service provider under the standard, when you define it, it's any organization that processes, transmits, or stores credit card data for somebody else's customers, or any service provider that can affect the security of the customer's cardholder data environment, right? So obviously, if you're doing intrusion detection prevention, if you're doing managed firewall services, you can affect your customer's security. So all merchants fall into one of 4 levels, and service providers fall into 2 different levels. So really, I have this red line across the screen. There's really, in my opinion, 2 levels. A level that requires an on-site audit, and a level that doesn't require an on-site audit, and you can get away with a self-assessment questionnaire. So the line in the sand is a million transactions. So generally, if you process 1 million or more transactions, you have to have an on-site audit. Below 1 million transactions, the card brands say your risk is so low, you can fill out a self-assessment questionnaire. And the validations, like I said, are self-assessment questionnaire for level 3 and 4, level 2 and above. The million line is right here. You generally have to have an on-site assessment. Service providers are categorized differently. The line in the sand is 300,000 transactions, okay? But I'll tell you this. This is the guidelines from the card brands that is embraced by the PCI Security Standards Council. But in reality, it's a little bit different. You may want to do business with a customer, and that customer says, "Are you PCI compliant?" And you said, "Well, yeah, I'm a MSP. We resell this. I'm going to fill out a self-assessment questionnaire, Form D, for service providers and give you the attestation of compliance." And that customer may say, well, that's all well and good, but we want you to go through a level 1 PCI audit. We want you to have a third party come in, a QSA company come in and do that. So my point is that sometimes certification levels, they don't matter. What matters is what the customer wants you to have. And obviously having a QSA company come in and do a third party audit, independent audit, is going to hold a lot more weight for your customers than filling out a self-assessment questionnaire. So with service providers, if you do less than 300,000 transactions, you can fill out a self-assessment questionnaire, Form D, for service providers, which is different than Form D for merchants. And level 1, you definitely have to have an on-site audit. So these are all the different types of questionnaires. You can see there's, I think, 9 different questionnaires, 8 or 9 questionnaires. And they're really based on risk. So the very top questionnaire for a merchant, and again, this is for 1 million or less transactions, Form A, it's basically card not present, and you outsource the payment process 100% to a third party. So I'll give you an example. This has 13 questions. So it's a very small form to fill out. But this is where I have a credit card, I have an e-commerce site, and when the person clicks checkout, it redirects me to PayPal, or it redirects the customer to PayPal to a payment page. Kind of looks like my page, same look and feel. And then they make the transaction, and then they're redirected back to my page. So that's one of the least riskiest methods to process. AEP, that's probably where you're using an authorized.net simplified integration method where they're doing a direct post to authorized.net, but they're staying on your website. A little bit more integrated. And then we go all the way down to the bottom, an SAQ Form D. This is for face-to-face, mail order, mostly e-commerce systems. Could be point-of-sale systems, but this is where they actually store credit card data, okay? This could be 1-800-Flowers that keeps the credit card on file, so the next time you call on Mother's Day, they can say, do you want me to charge your card? And you don't have to whip it out of your wallet, right? So this customer, since they're storing credit card data, they're at most risk. This self-assessment questionnaire has about 280 questions, almost the same amount of requirements that a regular PCI audit would have. Okay, so this right here is the meat and potatoes of the presentation. How, as an organization, how do you become compliant? What is the roadmap to compliance? What should I do to even get started? Well, we have a methodology that we put together, and it's basically 4 steps to compliance. And we're going to talk about each one individually, but this is just kind of an overview. The first step is an annual scoping engagement. What is in scope for your audit? How do you even determine what is in scope for your audit? Well, there's a litmus test that you go down. Does the device process, transmit, or store credit card data? Yes, then it's in scope. Does the device sit on the same network as something that processes, transmits, or stores credit card data? Yes, then it's in scope. Does the device reach into the credit card data environment? And then the last question is, can the device in any way, shape, or form affect the security of the cardholder data network? Do you have Active Directory serving out-of-scope networks and in-scope networks? Do you have a centralized virus scanning solution that services both in-scope and out-of-scope networks? Then those devices are in scope, and anything on that network is also in scope. So the scoping process is the very first thing you have to do as a part of the process. What is in scope for my assessment? Then you go into the gap assessment. Out of the gap assessment, you implement new technologies, change processes, remediate, and then we issue the final report on compliance. Now, when we issue the final report on compliance, it is up to you to maintain that compliance until the following year, because PCI compliance is an annual thing. You have to remember that also includes 4 quarterly passing ASV scans. Now, I 100% agree with Dan. Compliance, the word compliance is kind of pejorative, right? It has this negative connotation. When we engage a customer, we always tell a customer, look, Here's the Volkswagen solution. This will put a check mark in that box. Here's the Cadillac solution. It'll do a little bit more, but here's the Mercedes. And this is probably where you want to be. And I 100% agree with what he said. It's based on your risk appetite, right? We have a lot of customers who just want to put a check mark in the box, and that's fine. But I think you have to take a realistic approach to security compliance, keyword compliance, and have to understand what your risk appetite is. What information are you holding? What are the negative connotations if that information is breached? Okay, just want to point out on, this is the current version of the PCI DSS is 3.2.1. This is right out of page 10 of the PCI DSS. It says, at least annually and prior to the annual assessment, the assessed entity should confirm the accuracy of their PCI DSS scope. So we've gone on many engagements where we get there and customers have absolutely no idea what the scope is. And then in some cases, it's everything is in scope. We did an audit for a university recently where we found out through interview processes that they were receiving credit card data through email. And email is prolific throughout the organization, so of course everything is in scope. And they only thought that very specific things were in scope, and we had to give them some bad news. But it's really important to understand that the scoping exercise, which we're going to go through in a minute, it's your responsibility. My responsibility as an auditor, when I get to your location, is to just validate through an interview process that the scoping is correct. Okay, so let's talk about scoping. The very first thing you do in a scoping engagement is you identify and document the existence of all cardholder data. How is it accepted in your organization? Do you have it in electronic form? Do you have it in paper form? What are your processes for disposal? What are your processes for retention? I'll guarantee you, for large organizations, if you take the time to go out and talk to the people who are actually handling the credit card data, talk to the people who are actually dealing with these customers, you're going to find out they're doing some really weird stuff with credit card data. We dealt with a restaurant recently that had no idea that when the internet went down at their restaurants, they pulled out the old knuckle buster, put the paper up there, and where was those papers being held? So people are doing stuff with credit card data. I guarantee it, they're doing stuff with credit card data that you don't expect. That's the very first step of the scoping process is to find out what people are doing with it. Where does it exist? Once you have that information, you review it and you come up with clear ways or guidance on how to reduce your risk. You ask these questions. Hey, do you really need to keep 20 years of credit card numbers in your basement? Okay. Do you really need to keep 20 years of credit card data in Iron Mountain? Iron Mountain is a third party that people tend to forget about it. They just come pick up the stuff and they take it, right? So how do we reduce risk? Usually this involves purging of data, changing processes, possibly changing procedures and technology, right? Are there technologies out there that are less risky? Point-to-point encryption, where the organization doesn't have access to the encryption keys or decryption keys, is one way that you can reduce scope by implementing technology. Normally you segment. You can have if everything is in scope, you can segment a portion of your network. Again, data purging. And then after that, what you've done is you've clearly defined your cardholder data environment. Scoping actually screams data loss prevention, right? And so there are some free data loss prevention tools out there. And I'm sure, Rick, you can provide people a copy of this presentation, so you don't have to write them down. But Cert, Sensitive Number Finder, this is really good. It actually runs on Unix and Linux-based systems. Spider runs on Linux and Windows. But these are tools that you can run just to see if a point of sale might be in debug mode. It might be recording every single credit card transaction to a log file. And it's very easy to run these tools and find stuff like that. There's more expensive stuff out there, but I like the free stuff. Okay, for the gap assessment, the very first thing we do is we do an off-site scope review. So we're going to call you up, ask you a bunch of questions. We're going to try to determine whether or not your scope is correct. The second thing we do is we're going to give you what we call a document request listing. It's a 25-page document request that says anywhere the auditor needs to look at a document, we want to know what the document is and what page we can find this information. That's our map to doing that review. Then, after we've completed the document review and all of your documentation is in place, we will come on site and schedule our observations. Now, the auditor does, for a PCI audit, one or multiple of 5 things. The auditor will review a document, perform an interview, make an observation of an action, process, or state. Is the camera out of reach and non-maneuverable? Okay. Make an observation of a system setting, or take a sample. So when we come on site to do the on-site, we'll normally do observations. We might do our personal interviews, take some samples. And then once that's done, we give you a formal gap report. The gap report looks just like the ROC, except it'll tell you what you're missing. Now, out of the gap report, you'll implement new technologies, adjust working practices, define policies, new policies and procedures, and then you'll do some functionality testing. What I want you to know is every QSA company is different. A PCI audit is supposed to be what they call a point-in-time certification. The time we give you a passing ROC, you are compliant. We run into a lot of issues with organizations that they take so long to remediate gaps, right? So we try to make it to where when we get to the gap report, we try to work with you enough to where your gaps are minimal. As a QSA company, we give an organization about 60 days to remediate gaps. If they take longer than 60 days as a QSA company, we need to look at everything again because we feel that too many things can change outside of that 60-day window. If you can remediate within that 60 days, we'll come back in and we'll only look at the gaps, and then we'll issue that final report. Now, it is possible that an organization cannot meet a specific control. If you have a valid technical or business constraint, could be a budget constraint that you can't implement a control, we can issue what's called a compensating control. We do not like to write these because these are scrutinized by the card brands when we get audited by the PCI Council. That being said, as long as you've done everything that you were supposed to do for the gap remediation, we'll issue the final report on compliance. We'll do a review of the gaps, make sure everything's compliant. If we have to, we'll write compensated controls. We'll finalize the audit, and then we'll generate a formal report on compliance. What's important about the report on compliance is this is a very confidential document. You never, if somebody says, are you PCI compliant, you're never going to give them that report on compliance because it contains a lot of sensitive information about your organization, possibly the types of firewalls you're using, possibly some IP information. So, and IP, I mean intellectual property. So the PCI Council came out with this document called an AOC, an Attestation of Compliance. So the self-assessment questionnaire, part of the self-assessment questionnaire, you'll see a part that's called the AOC, the Attestation of Compliance. With a report on compliance, it's a completely separate document. If somebody asks you, hey, are you PCI compliant, then that is the document that you should give them. Now, some companies like Amazon, they won't even give you their AOC unless you fill out a confidentiality agreement or a non-disclosure agreement. But with that, that's it. That's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions? Are there any questions about PCI compliance?
In terms of the fines, because at the end of the day, it's how much risk you can bear. The fines are based on what measure?
So the card brands each still maintain their own security programs. So back in 2004, PCI never existed. And every card brand had their own security program. Discover had a program called DISC. But anyway, those security programs detail fines and so forth. The card brands keep those close to their chest, right? All of them got together, created the PCI Council. So it's really important to understand the PCI Council doesn't levy fines, it's the card brands. I've seen some of the fines go $50 a record, $75 a record, $100 a record for a data breach. My recommendation to everyone is to always get a comprehensive data breach policy. And make sure you have a legal review done on it by a technology attorney, not your inside counsel unless they're very tech savvy. Because there's been a lot of customers of ours that have experienced in the past a data breach where their insurance hasn't covered them because it was phishing and it wasn't a physical attack or something along those lines. But they can be pretty steep. They can be pretty steep. But data breach costs are a lot more than that, right? So you have the card brand fines, but you could also have fines from the FTC. You have brand recognition issues. You're going to have to get credit monitoring for the people that were affected, not to mention the lawsuits from individuals. So the overall cost of a data breach can be absolutely huge. You might have to have a forensic audit done. So having a good data breach protection policy, probably $1 million or more, depending upon how much you're at risk, is the best advice I could give you.
Thanks for watching this session provided by SECNAP Network Security. A link to other Compliance Champ videos in this series can be found in the description of this video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. For over 17 years, SECNAP has enabled clients to conduct business effectively and securely on the internet. Our security as a service solution, CloudJacket X, features patented technology in combination with security experts that manage, detect, and respond to ongoing cybersecurity threats 24/7. CloudJacket X eliminates labor-intensive log analysis and alert fatigue, allowing our clients to focus on their business. SECNAP also provides regulatory compliance and information security assessments. For more information, visit secnap.com.